This podcast presents the results of research on Chinese culture conducted at the SWPS University in Poland as part of the China Horizons Research Grant funded by the European Commission. The focus of our research is on understanding modern Chinese society through culture, looking at works exploring social issues and the way these issues are communicated to domestic audiences. Today we will be discussing the latest developments in film and literature in mainland China. We will be focusing on the newest thematic trends, the most important cinematic productions and literary works of the last few years, changes in how artists and writers work in today's China, and important issues and problems that they are facing. My name is Marcin Jacoby and I will be your host today. Joining me online are members of my research team, František Reismüller and Piotr Machajek. František and Piotr, welcome to the podcast.
Hello. Glad to be here.
Yes. Thank you for having me.
All right. So now I think it's time for us to get to the nitty-gritty straight away. So František, maybe we'll start with you. Maybe I could ask you first what you consider some of the most interesting Chinese film productions of this season. Earlier this month, you have just returned from your research trip to China, and I'm sure you have many fascinating things to tell us.
Oh, thank you, Marcin. I definitely do. You know, if I was to talk literally about specific movies, I would like to pick two. One is completely new. It's been released this year. It's called Resurgent, Upstream in English. It was directed by Xu Zheng. And it made a big fuss in China, actually, because the topic of this film are the delivery guys who deliver different foods and different goods in China every day. It's a big topic. It's a big business in the service industry. And this movie basically tells a story about a guy who was laid off from his previous job as a programmer. And because he was quite old, 40 plus years, and he couldn't find another job in his business, he decided to become one of those guys on motorcycles and, just drive right through the streets of Shanghai and deliver the goods. And it's a very harsh experience for him. You know, if I was to talk about the quality of the movie generally, it wasn't that good. It was really uneven genre-wise. But it touches upon a very important social topic. It is a big problem, the lives of these delivery guys in China. And it is great that somebody started talking about it with the language of a cinema. It made a big fuss on social media and in media outlets. And, there was a big talk about it because everybody started to kind of realize that, yes, this really is a problem. And it should be addressed in the society, and there should be, a certain type of acceptance, and honor even giving to those guys who deliver your food every day, basically, and who are from all around China, coming to the big cities. Maybe this is their only way how to make their living, and they have to smile all the time. They have to deliver on time. Otherwise, they have to pay a fine. So this is one quite interesting movie that I just saw in China during the last trip.
Yeah. So when you say about the sort of fuss that it made, it was mostly people realizing how harsh living realities and work realities are for these people and what kind of stress they experience. In everyday life? Is it like a sort of a revelation to people that there are so many of those guys all around you and their lives are really hard? Is this the issue, or were there other issues connected that were subject of these discussions that you mentioned online?
Well, this was, I think, the main issue, realizing how harsh the lives of those people are and, how they are treated actually by society, as a kind of a lowest sphere of society. Then there were also other minor topics. For example, the main character got laid off from his job because, the company was going through some restructuring. But the problem was he couldn't find a job because he was 40 plus years old. And it's very, very hard if, you are that old to actually find a job in China because you're expensive already. And even, young people just, after their graduation from universities, even those people have trouble finding a job. When you are 40 plus, there is basically no chance for you to work in your field.
Yeah, I think when you visit China, you just see these guys resting and looking through the cell phones in the free time and just eating junk food somewhere, just on the bikes all the time. I've also heard recently in China people it was sort of a joke or humor that China has the most educated delivery guys in the whole world, because if you ask them, most of them are university graduates. So this is exactly what you were saying. Several social issues probably dealt at the same time. What was the second film you wanted to tell us about?
Well, the second film is actually from last year already. And it was brought to my attention by people from the film circles that I've met during my last trip. The film is called Nien Hui Bu Neng Ting. In English, it's Johnny Keep Walking. And basically, the story is about a guy who gets promoted from a factory to an office by mistake. It's partially a comedy, but one of the things that it describes are really the harsh environments in big corporations in China. The stress people are enduring, terrible long working hours, everybody being scared that they will be laid off for one reason or another, and also the top management really not seeing a value in people. Again, it was partially like a comedy. But it also touched upon these very serious topics. And what was the most interesting thing there was when there was this bad character of one of the managers, and he was describing the way how you should manage people, how you should give them tasks in a very vague way so that they don't really understand what you want. And then if they make a mistake, it's their mistake, not yours. And similar things. And if you think about it, this is kind of what we sinologists, if we research the political system in China, what we reveal, how it works since Mao Zedong. That was basically the basis of Mao Zedong politics, give vague instructions. And then if you punish somebody after not following the instructions, it's definitely their fault. Nobody can blame you. So this was very interesting.
Okay, so you moved into politics, but actually the two choices that you gave, the two films that you talked about, deal with the same issue of labor rights or working environment. So do you think this is one of the most interesting topics for the audiences or for the directors, for the producers? Is this out of your sort of look at the Chinese cinema, Chinese films in the last few years, is this one of the outstanding topics? Or maybe there are some other ones that are equally important to people? How you would assess it?
Well, I believe the working environments, that's definitely something, so to say, being explored in Chinese cinema, in films as such. Of course, there are other topics, like the medical system, for example. Those are actually being present even in these two movies. When there's always somebody, getting seriously ill, and then the people, it was the case of the first movie I mentioned, Upstream. The father of the main character falls ill, and at the same time when the character loses his job, and then there is this huge medical bill to be paid. And, that's a big topic that you can see in movies as well, the lack of proper health insurance, So there is health insurance in China, of course, but it doesn't really cover too many things. So this is also something worth mentioning.
All right. Okay. And your recent trip to China was also a trip during which you talked with some film producers, directors, some people representing the industry. What are their concerns? What are the things that they wanted to talk to you about?
Well, as you mentioned, I talked with two production companies, actually, producing some of them even quite big movies. I also talked to some people from academia and also to some artists. And basically, they are all afraid that Chinese cinema is kind of in a crisis, so to say, mostly economical crisis. People just, stopped going to cinemas. Within the system of the production and releasing Chinese movies, there is not even enough, time for a film to succeed. So basically, you have 1 month for a movie to make it. After 1 month, it goes away from the cinemas forever, because as one of the representatives of the smaller production company mentioned, there is basically no chain of these, like art house oriented clubhouse cinemas. So most of those cinemas are big multiplexes. So after 1 month, film is gone, goes to a streaming platform. And if it, haven't succeeded during that 1 month, it disappears, and then it's not even worth exporting to like a foreign country or something like that.
Okay, so life is not only hard for delivery guys, but it's also very, very hard for filmmakers in order for them to succeed economically. So again, we are talking about economy more than about politics, censorship, and other things like this. Okay, that's very interesting. Let's move to literature now. Piotr, you have been doing a lot of research on Chinese literary works. How would you sum up the latest trends in what writers in China write about? Any patterns that you see? Any outstanding topics that you feel are worth mentioning here?
I think that the precarious conditions that František has just mentioned and somehow introduced into the conversation are one of the things that are a recurring theme in contemporary Chinese literature. If you look from the outside in macro perspective, you either focus your sight on sci-fi or internet literature. But if we focus on the trends as to what they write about, I would mention a few other keys. One would be a moving away from grand narratives towards regional voices, towards a kind of locality. The last few years brought so-called Dongbei Renaissance, as these are stories told by those who inherited the wave of layoffs at the advent of the 21st century of state-owned enterprises that resulted in millions of workers that used to be hailed in high socialist China turned into human scrapes, as they are called in China. And the similar predicament is seen in butler poetry or low-rung society poetry, as you call it, or worker poetry. Well, many decades before, the lower class of Chinese society would be represented in literature by literary figures. Now they do not need such enlightened guidance and voice, since these workers, these butlers, so people who fight for, who strive to survive in the lower ranks of Chinese society, can speak for themselves, and they quite often use poetry to do that. We should mention at this point that poetry is a very important cultural meme in China, and I'm saying meme in a original sense, as a cultural gene. And to close up, I would maybe mention female perspectives on the social issues. 2 years ago, China was rocked by a few shocking histories of gender-based violence. And no surprise that the last 2-3 years showed an increased interest in works by female writers on marriage, for instance, on relationships, on insecurities that are a part of a female's life in contemporary China.
All right, that's really interesting, and the topics that you mentioned here, especially the things connected with the position of a woman in a Chinese society and the big layoffs, and also the sort of the voice of the people from the lower strata of the society. All of these things together with František, what you said about the delivery guys, also remind me of the films that went viral in China, shocking the public about, again, violence directed towards women about I remember one film that was very, very famous about a delivery guy kneeling in front of a security guy at some building and just apologizing for something that he shouldn't apologize for, and being like scolded in a really nasty way. And people are just shocked at how brutal the society is sometimes. And that's probably also reflected in the works that you look at. The locality, Piotr, that you mentioned, the Dongbei, is it just Dongbei? Is it the layoffs? Because that reminds me of this very long-term interest in Chinese writers in sort of exploring local themes. It's either a city or a region or some countryside. Would you link these two together, or is it a completely different phenomenon?
Since although the trauma that Dongbei went through is unique to this region, now it's while unemployment rates soar and the economy grows sluggish, these Dongbei stories kind of resonate with larger audiences. But as for locality, there is also this visible tendency to revisit countryside, or to write works in that mixed dialects or mixed local cultures that serve as a counterpoint to the dominance of Putonghua and this mainstream literary language. And those works have been noted and awarded, quite often in the last few years.
Okay, this is also a very interesting new phenomenon. The locality that we talked about, it has been there since 1980s probably, but then the revival of local dialects that you mentioned, do you think it's a sort of a counterpoint and a sort of a call for individuality in this very sort of centralized system and a uniform culture? Is this a sort of a mild protest against everything being the same? Or does it have any other roots or reasons?
Maybe there is a sense that urbanization and modernization has not brought the outcomes and fruits that could be shared for anyone, and it's paired with a sense that Chinese may lose something along the way, and by something I mean this local flavor or places that are going to be gone because of the rushing urbanization processes.
All right. Okay. And František, that probably relates to also many of the films that you have watched.
Yes, I just wanted to follow up with the thought that you can see a lot of movies shot in, let's say, tier 5 cities or even in the countryside. And I think there are two reasons why this happens. One is some kind of let's say, a tradition, because, if you think about the 5th generation of Chinese filmmakers, like Zhang Yimou, or the 6th generation, like Jia Zhanghe, they have been always looking to those directions, kind of exploring, let's say, the less developed parts of China. So it can be like a tradition, that's where the good art movies are shot. But on the other hand, I also believe if you want to somehow criticize society, and even if only a part of your story is kind of the critique basically of the story is directed to governments or officials, it's better if you do it on a local level. That always works. The more to the center you go, the more basically dangerous from the point of view of censorship it is for you. So this is something that always works. You never aim to the top. And, I can make a parallel here. So within the two movies that I mentioned, if there was a villain, especially in the second one, in The Company, it wasn't, the big boss. It was the, vice CEO or somebody like that. And that's the same. If I have a movie that is happening in the countryside, it's always better, because you talk about lower officials, and they are allowed to make mistakes basically, and you are allowed to talk about it. So I see these like two tendencies here. One is the tradition, like a good art house movie is shot in the countryside. It's basically like that, and good comedy is shot in the city. But yeah, if you want to criticize, it's better to do it on a smaller scale, let's say.
If you want to talk about political, what's political in Chinese art, maybe it's not about looking for some kind of decent or open challenge to either the party or politicians or specific policies. What's political about this literature is discussing the power relations, and I think it's very clear to see when you look at these precarious conditions that people find themselves in, and they write about it. It's about power relations that are, in a sense, global because of a position that China finds itself in a global chain of production, technology, and so on. So it's not system specific. It's more about power relations that that make millions of people less needed, or
Yeah, and now with the economic challenges that China faces, probably the awareness of how hard life is to many people in the country is growing, and people experience it themselves. I think if we moved back 10, 15 years, the middle class in bigger cities, I think, led quite a comfortable life. And now many of them face some of the challenges that they would not face before. And also the prospects, I don't know if in the books and in the films that you watch, is this lack of hope that is visible in the Chinese society on the streets and conversations, has it already found its place in art? But it's definitely something that is a new quality in China, of people not believing anymore that tomorrow will be better than today and next year will be better than this year. And this was something that kept people running even through very difficult times, and this period seems to have gone. František, do you see that in film?
I'd say actually not, because you have happy endings in Chinese cinema.
You have to have happy endings, as I understand.
Exactly. So, you always have to just, how to say it, maybe just analyze certain parts of the movies, because it always goes towards a happy end, about, like people working together, making a common effort, helping each other to achieve a better society. This narrative, it never disappears in the end. And that might be also the reason why those films that, have the right to actually explore social issues are very often comedies, or like comedy dramas, but, it's laughable.
Okay, this is a very interesting point. I wonder whether there is a little bit more freedom for not such happy endings in literature. Do you see, Piotr, some of the works you looked at as less of a comedic inclination and less of happy end structures, and more sort of genuine as a voice of artists expressing the way they see social reality?
Yes, I could definitely name some. For instance, Shuang Xuetao is one of the best known representative of this new Dongbei wave, and his works were even praised by state media as sincere, but on the other hand, there was a kind of warning by saying that we don't want wallowing. We want literature that looks into a future and looks bright towards it. On the other hand, we could discuss ambiguous situation of this butler parts. Once they get noticed, they quite often receive stipends and kind of state support. And in this way, they become a part of literary mainstream. And thanks to these financial incentives, their situation gets much better. but perhaps their willingness or ability to critique specific predicaments of Chinese society or situation of the country may decrease.
Okay, it's really interesting that when you talk about poetry and what you call the butler poetry, with China so much busy about earning money and surviving, and people reading less and less books, and being the less and less place for your interests or what you would pursue out of your pure interest, and more of a sort of a necessity to do what is necessary for you to survive. Where does it come from? How comes that there is something like butler poetry? I mean, is there any financial way of success when you are a poet? And if yes, how are they making it?
You could imagine that becoming a poet is not a way to make money in this world. And China might be an exceptional place where for people who are couriers, nannies, or factory workers, this kind of recognition, that they receive just for saying their stories, be it in form of short stories or novellas or poems, is a way upward. As a kind of social, is a platform for social mobility. But I wouldn't say that they do it just for the sake of making money. That's certainly not the case.
Of course, but how do they distribute the works? I mean, if they write poetry, who reads it? Who finds them? With so many people, producing content on the internet, how can you become recognizable as a poet who is a nanny or a factory worker?
Well, quite often it's a sheer luck. Let's say, or it's a gist of genius that gets kind of noticed. There is one quite well-known example of a poet, Zheng Xiaochong, who wrote a poem wondering how long would the line go if you were to make it out of fingers cut off because of factory incidents that took place. She herself lost a half of a finger during a factory shift, and this suddenly got noticed, and she went overnight. Or publishing at Weibo is one way to go. This is a case of Fan Yusu, who in 2017 shared an autobiographical essay recounting her being nanny while being away from her own children.
Okay, so internet poetry is being distributed mostly through the social media channels. So it's either Weibo or maybe somebody's sharing it on WeChat. This is how people get noticed.
Yes, even though you start small by distributing paper copies, and these are very, very often less than 5,000 copies, which means almost next to nothing in China, and you distribute them by hand among the people you can trust or you share your passion with. But it's internet that's the medium to spread.
Okay, well, if we talk about internet and we talk about literature, I have to ask you about internet literature, because it's something so much different from what we have in Europe. If you take a public transport in China, you take a metro, a bus, you hardly see anyone reading any paper books, but you see a lot of people reading on the cell phones, and a lot of that is internet literature. Can you tell us a few words about this phenomenon of internet literature in China, because it's something very, very specific to this country?
Yes, it is. But on the other hand, the trend is kind of going global, and it has been in a way embraced by the mainstream, and Chinese state seems to believe that online literature may become a vehicle of soft power, of Chinese soft power. So I would say it's a grassroots movement that kind of reminds. In fact, it is similar to a factory work, because the writers, they have to churn out at least few thousand words a day in order to keep up with readership, because if they don't, they lose readership, and once they do, they are kind of out of the game. And nowadays, approximately 400 million people in China read internet literature, and there is around 4 or 8 million writers, people who try to make their own way through writing internet literature.
Okay, and what is the relation between this market for internet literature, as you said, mass production of chapters by chapters after chapter after chapter every day, and this literature that we are used to, written by professional writers who publish it in publishing houses? Do these two words see one another? Is there a flow between one and the other, or are they separate?
No, I would say that these two are parallel worlds that barely cross. Cai Xiang, one of China's leading literary critics, makes the distinction between the cultural bourgeois, who convert culture into capital, and the cultural proletariat, or intellectual laborers, who convert culture into labor. And the vast majority of these online writing hands, so to say, are in fact cultural proletariat. And those dizzying careers of this, let's say, 30 or 50 online authors who make millions is only a drip in the ocean of people who work as if they were a kind of factory workers, writing and a fantasy, often escapist novel that are about superheroes, and they are never ending, quite often incoherent, illogical stories.
Okay, so if you're looking for great literature, maybe it would be quite hard to find it in internet literature, but it is a very important phenomenon. We moved a little bit from talking about the social topics in the arts towards the market itself. So maybe let's just pursue it for a second. And František, I would like to ask you about the film you mentioned in a few sentences back, that less and less people go to cinemas. China used to be a heaven for cinema goers, the second biggest market in the world, and later the biggest for ticket sales. And now everything is changing. This is a huge shift. Can you tell us a little bit about this and about how the film market is faring in China?
Well, actually, even if you look at numbers for the October 1st holidays, the Golden Week in China, they dropped. The box office were nothing as expected it to be. Usually, this is the, really golden week even for cinema goers, but it wasn't the case this year, and you can find various media outlets writing about it, that this was actually like a symbol of the problem that China is facing right now. People just don't go to the cinemas. Then especially for the, let's say, more independent filmmakers, and I say independent in quotation marks because, we are still talking about films that are being released in China and get the so-called dragon seal, meaning they pass the censorship. But, those filmmakers who do not want to make really like commercial movies, they don't really have, like the possibilities to, gain resources for their movies, because even the producers, and I was told so by the production companies I met, they changed. They used to be, willing to invest in whatever will have a success, and especially like international success. But now they really look at, will this bring me my money back? So, that is why there is a lot of blockbusters and a lot of comedies being made in China, One of the most successful segments, as I learned during my last trip, is movies for children, animated movies. This is still, doing well, but anything else is really like struggling. And, in the end, it means, the trend towards commercialization, because everybody just, wants to make movies that will make money. And also I mentioned the comedies, and I think that's one of the results, So you have to make sure that your audiences will be entertained at first. And only then, after you entertain them, you can maybe, start with some heavier topics. So this is really quite significant lately.
Okay, so that just tells us that there are more and more economic challenges for the sector, and it's more and more difficult to make both ends meet, and less space then for risk and discovery and artistic ideas. Okay, this is not very positive for Chinese cinema. I wanted to ask you also. In my research on visual arts, I see something which is a new trend, a huge interest in AI-generated art, a huge interest in exploring how AI tools can help artists express themselves. And now you have a plethora of different works exploring sort of different possibilities that technology gives us. Do you see this fascination with technology also in film? Because it's also visible in theater. So our research on theater also showed that Chinese artists, theater directors, maybe a little bit more than people in other countries, are very much interested in this sort of pursuing this path of working with technology and seeing what new will come out of it.
Actually, my answer would be no. I don't see it that much in cinema. Of course, I mentioned animated movies like CGI, that's a big thing, definitely. But in the more, realistic tradition of Chinese cinema, the technology is not really being explored as a topic. Of course, the science fiction cinema, that's growing as well. Usually, like The Wandering Earth or other films being made after a book. That is growing, but I don't think that is what you mean. But there is another shift that also has a connection with technology. And, that is the usual, people are only using their phones for everything. And they're even watching videos, let's say not movies, but videos on their mobile phones, and there is so much production, so many things to watch that they, kind of tend towards shorter genres, let's say. So there's this big boom of short videos, even like narrative videos, not only like a TikTok people having fun videos, but really like fiction videos, but only like there are these mini series, when you have a one part that is just 2 minutes long, and there's like 10 of them, and then you move to something else. And I was told by the people from the academia and the people from the production companies as well that this is also something that is kind of like killing Chinese cinema. The vast volume of what is being produced, the long way you have from a short video toward a 2 hours long feature films where nobody can really focus, that's just too much for people. And again, as Piotr mentioned before, this is not only China specific. I think this is like a whole world tendency that we can see nowadays.
Yeah, that just reminds me of a conversation I had recently in China with a media guy. And he was complaining that his boss asked him to make shorter and shorter videos on media topics. And now it's a 1 minute video. And he's complaining that he can't possibly say anything of value in a 1 minute video when he talks about a complex media topic. So the form is just getting shorter and shorter. And we are flooded, as you say, with content of various quality. Piotr, do you see something similar in literature? Because internet literature is the reverse of that. You have really long text and the market is flooded, but not with short forms, but quite long forms. But how do you view this?
Well, the form is long, but it is, so to say, dosed in small installments. So people, there is a Chinese term Yaoyin, which comes from the dream of red chamber, and it's mental pleasure, but now it's more often translated into something along the lines of brain porn, that you jump into a story and you kind of dive into a rabbit hole that you just keep moving into the next one. Since the chapters are short, but they are like, you have like, let's say 500 chapters. So you could say of a phenomena of binge reading, so to say.
Yeah, well, again, this reminds me of one of the trip on the Chinese metro, and I was observing a guy reading an internet novel, and he was just scrolling it much too fast for him to be able to read everything. And he was, as you said, just fishing out some of the bits and pieces and moving quickly again and again and again, and from one story to another story and to another story, so consuming them in a very, very sort of hectic way. And this maybe is a pattern.
Well, maybe we should have made this podcast like 3 minutes long to keep the attention of everyone. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, don't worry. We have only about 10 minutes left, so I think it's high time for us to just think about maybe some of the most important works. And František, you did start with them, but Piotr, maybe you could tell us a little bit more about some of the literary works that you think would be really good in showing the condition of Chinese literature now, or some of the issues that are very much on top of the agenda of writers in China now. Any recommendations you would have for us to understand China better and Chinese literature better?
So since I talked quite a lot about Dongbei writers, I would recall 2 collection of short stories, since short story and novellas are still, one of the most picked form by Chinese authors, and these are Winter Swimming by Ban Yu and Moses on the Plain by Shuang Xuetao. And apart from that, I would like to draw the attention toward a relatively new literary award, Blank Pane Imaginist Award, which was co-founded by the Swiss luxury watchmaker and the Chinese publisher in 2018, I think. And I would mention maybe one of these of the winners, Lin Zhao Chao Shitu, which we could roughly translate as tidal chart, as a very whimsical blend of imagination and historical realism. And the story depicts a journey of a frog from Guangdong through Macau to the heart of European empires in the 19th century. And this may sound freakish, but as the frog's physical body floats across the oceans from east to west, her identity as well remains in constant flux. And maybe one more to go to recall our conversation on Butler poetry. It's a quite sensational in terms of sales, in terms of number. Debut was published 1 year ago, Wang Jiping, The Man in a Hurry, a collection of poems by deliveryman who has traveled over 150,000 kilometers on his job. And through his poetry, Wang captures the life of those who are on the constant move to survival. And even though his works have already been widely circulated online, the paper copy is still selling, and which is still a thing worth mentioning in terms of poetry and its overall status.
All right, thank you very much, Piotr. We have the last few minutes, and I would like each of you to take turns and tell us a little bit about how you think things might change in the future, or what kind of things we might expect. And if there is anything you want to add to what we talked about, of course, now is the time to do that. František, maybe we'll start with you.
I think the trend towards like commerce will continue in China quite a lot. The main melody films that are kind of like mirroring Hollywood in the 1990s, with, films like Wolf Warrior 1 and 2, which is kind of very nationalistic Chinese Rambo style film. Those things will be happening because they are quite popular. They, encourage the nationalist spirit. They are encouraged by the government, of course. And they have good box offices, and it's quite understandable. It's just kind of like fun. So this will, I guess, really continue, and it will be hard for people who really want to make, art, and to kind of be something different and maybe continue with the tradition of let's say realism or modernism in Chinese cinema. It will be hard for them, to really succeed. Also, I think everything is already moving online, and this might be a big problem. I just wanted to mention very quickly one more principle that is bad in China, basically, regarding the like big feature films that are meant for cinemas. I already mentioned, they only have 1 month. But then, of course, they can move to streaming services like iQIYI. But if you don't know the movie, if you don't know the director, you will never find it there. And it was mentioned by the people I talked to as a big problem, because there are so many layers of TV shows, of animated movies, of the blockbusters that, that are much more, better for the streaming service itself to show to the audience, that you can't really get recommended a good film that is describing some social problems, or even not social problems, anything but in a good way. People and the filmmakers and the production companies, they see it as a big problem.
Okay, so again, it's just flooding by content, and with the flood, it's really difficult to find things of value because you are flooded by things that help people generate profits, and this is the highest amount of things that you can find. Okay, thank you very much, František. Piotr.
Well, as for the future, I would certainly point out to Chinese science fiction, the topic that we've barely touched upon, but this area is getting quite a lot of institutional support, and I think that this kind of push may result in Chinese sci-fi being even wider known to the international audiences, and also more widely read in China. Well, literature is under quite a lot of pressures. I mean, historically, literature had to do quite a lot of heavy lifting for the nation and for the society, and now Xi Jinping has required, upright literature that is for the people, by the people, and people-centered. But as the market shows, and one of the author of bedtime stories said quite frankly, people do not want to be lectured by books and by literature anymore. They are looking for some comfort and a way to relax in a way. So these seems like contradictory forces that literature finds itself stuck between them. But as we've seen through this quite brief review, Chinese authors and writers, they do in fact produce a literature that is people-centered, as we talked about, these local specifics, this precarity, and maybe discussing those, discussing these power relationships, imbalances, and those things that are in fact becoming a global thing in world literature will mark the way for Chinese literature going forward.
Thank you very much. Difficult times, as we have seen in our conversation, a lot of financial pressure, but also a lot of interest in showing these difficult times to audiences. And we'll see whether China will create cultural brands like you suggested, Piotr, with the science fiction literature. Will it be an export brand for China? Will it be supported by the state so that it becomes sort of a widely known brand of China? We'll just wait and see. Thank you very much for this conversation and for the insight that you provided about film and about literature in China. And I hope the listeners found it interesting. You were listening to a podcast presenting research on Chinese culture conducted at the SWPS University in Poland as part of the China Horizons Research Grant funded by the European Commission. And with me was František Reismüller and Piotr Machajek from our research team. František, Piotr, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.